Race is probably the most politically charged and viciously fought concept in the modern political arena. The very fact that some are excluded from talking about race, because of their race, makes clear the absurdity of the politicization of race. This is a postmodernist trick that is used to cripple democratic debate and the rule of the majority. It is fundamentally anti-democratic to deny any portion of the population the right to speak on any topic. Voltaire would not stand for this kind of nonsense, but he's dead. Race is a term that is used in multiple roles simultaneously, so we need to be clear about what is meant and when. There are three components that are intermingled in the concept of race. They are genetic predisposition, phenotype presentation, and cultural inheritance. Simply put, this boils down to who your ancestors were, what you look like, and what you were taught. Of these, only two are socially visible: what you look like and what cultural markers you exhibit. Generally, no one knows who your ancestors really were, but there are physical differences between us that indicate a probability of originating from a specific genetic group. A genetic group is an inbreeding group that has experienced identifiable genetic drift compared to humanity as a whole. Often this occurs at the tribal level, where language, religions, customs, and geography prevent regular mixing beyond the tribe boundary. Of course, these differences are not infallible, and the identification of tribes by how people look is not practical in most of the world due to mixing. But tribes still exist in the modern world. Tutsis and Hutus are identifiable tribes with distinct physical features. That was one of the reasons the genocide in Rwanda was possible. You can't hide if your very body makes you a target. And this is the premise in which race is typically used in conversation today. The concept is that how you look is massively important to your outcomes. And this is what we will test. We will use the definition of race that would be recognized by the most retarded KKK member. Do they look different? The problem with using physical appearance as the explanatory factor for variation in outcome is that it fails the most obvious of analyses. Do people who look the same have the same outcomes? In the crudest sense, this becomes: do people who look like the majority have equal outcomes? I'll defer to Thomas Sowell for the stats, but the answer is simply, no. Even people from within the same family don't have equal opportunity for success. If there's variation in outcomes within a family, then it is a stretch for it to be race that determines the variation. It turns out that the education received by the later siblings is not as good as the education that is received by the first child. More parental resources are expended on the first than subsequent children. This highlights that whilst equality of opportunity is attainable, equality of outcome is a foolish objective. So, variation exists, even within family units. But what about between people who look different? So here we get to the central hypothesis, that being physically distinctive is such a disadvantage it prevents success from being possible for the majority of people who differ physically from the majority. A moment's thought shows this not to be true. The children of Chinese and Indian immigrants massively outperform Eurasian children in schooling and have a higher probability to go on to high-income jobs such as medicine. This is so culturally prevalent that there's even the quip that the A- grade is an Asian F, implying that expectations of academic performance in Asian children is extraordinarily high. So, clearly it is not true that race prevents performance in society. But what about a particular group, people who look African American for instance? Is there a group of people who are genetically similar and look the same, but have a different cultural history? Could they have radically different outcomes? Yes, it turns out there is. The West Indian population is a mix of African, indigenous Carib tribes, and European ancestry, but superficially most West Indians appear to be the same as African Americans. But West Indians have a different cultural history, and as it turns out have different success rates in marriage, income, education and life expectancy to that of the superficially identical African American subgroup. So even within groups that to the racist oppressor would look identical, one group outperforms the other. Historically too, the African American cohort was not always disproportionately underperformant. During the 1960s, the average African American family had better married income than their white compatriots. Again, I'll refer you to Sowell for the details. So the premise that racism alone held back the average African American is wrong on several counts. It is untrue historically. It is untrue compared to races that look the same. It is untrue for races who look different. So, having dealt with that, we must ask, what's going on? If it's not the genetic predisposition, and not the physical appearance that is causing the difference, then maybe it is the culture. This is a no-brainer. Right back to Roman times, if you were from a distinct tribe but adopted Roman customs and laws, you would be regarded as a Roman citizen. It did not matter where you were from. It did matter how you behaved. The Emperor Septimus Severus was a Libyan, and was famous for having a thick accent. Yet, was emperor of the most powerful nation in the world. The same process is true today. Cultures that are similar to yours are easier to get along with. They have similar customs, priorities and objectives. It's probably moot to point this out at this stage, but that is the point of societies and cultures. They are more efficient by operating in concert with each other. They prevent conflict internally, and by doing so strengthen the whole. The success of the West Indian population, of the Chinese and Indian population, indicates that America is actually a place where opportunity abounds. And race is not an insurmountable barrier. The recent change in African American socio-economic outcomes indicates there's another process at work. One that is undermining their chances of success. Maybe it is no surprise to learn that educational attainment amongst African Americans is low, with African American males being particularly poorly served. Are the resources more scarce for African Americans than they were for first-generation immigrants? That's possible, but unlikely. If you want to pick a reason for the underperformance of African Americans in America today, it could be because of a cultural difference. It makes sense that a culture that does not value education will likely not produce educated individuals, and a culture that does value education will likely produce highly educated people. There is a reason why the jibe about the A- grade being an Asian F is not about an African American F. In modern society, the single factor that correlates best to success is educational attainment. There are many things that can change your prospects in life. Geography and access to resources is one, but the cultural attitude of your society is also a factor. In essence, this analysis reduces to a simple question: is it race? As in the color of your skin? That determines your probability of success. Or is it your culture and the ability to achieve high educational levels? The evidence as it stands indicates it is probably culture. It is very fortunate that it is culture. Because culture can be changed. If it were otherwise, then the situation would be dire indeed. But then again, if it were otherwise, then the burden of proof would be on demonstrating that underperformance was due to genetic or phenomenological outcomes, in spite of the evidence to the contrary. If this were proven, then the reason for underperformance was innate, and there is nothing that can be done to change that. That would be sad indeed. In conclusion, race is used as a confounding term for three distinct properties: genetic makeup, physical appearance, and cultural history. Examining each of these in turn shows that the only sustainable explanation for modern societal performance is culture. Race is not a problem, culture is. Think through whether what I say here is right or wrong. Apply the hater test. If I'm right, am I right because I am from a social section, or is it simpler? Is Thomas Sowell just plain right? Your only defense against idiots is your rational mind. Use it to improve yourself to become the best human being you can be, because ultimately that's all we can ever hope for. Be kind to each other. FTS.